sort of piggyback onto what Dave was doing there, but I won't be using agents, but just thinking about how teachers bring their own agency as well into the picture. So I'm going to think about some of the ways in which I might use it when I'm developing course content. And although I'll be looking at perhaps some ways in which I'll be developing lesson activities, how I can actually save some time in generating some of those bits of content too. So I'm just going to share my screen, and we're going to be talking about this section here, which is called Calibrating Challenge. And hopefully, Dave, you can just confirm that we're looking at my Copilot screen.
I see it.
Wonderful. Okay, fantastic. So I'm working in my Copilot space here, and I'm going to be using the web toggle there, just because I will want it to be pulling some information from the web rather than just my work-based files. And I'm going to be starting off with thinking about how I might want to bring in the context of students who are doing, perhaps they're working their way towards an exam, and I want them to be focusing on their accuracy when it comes to specific concepts within a particular topic. And this topic is going to be on economics. Now, what I'm going to do is, first of all, and I think context is king pretty much when you're doing any sort of work around prior learning and activating challenge, because you need to know starting points to challenge students effectively, is going to ask you to look at a particular past paper for economics students and tell me which questions relate to the topic of interest rates. It might be something that I haven't done much, and I want to find out what they're actually going to be tested on in the final analysis, so I can really curate my activities specifically for them. So I'm going to use the little tab down here, add a file, and I'm going to choose this economics past paper. Okay, from How the Economy Works, section 2. So I'm just going to open that up. I've actually done it before, so it's already in my uploaded file section. But I'm just going to then run that and ask Copilot. I'm not using an agent here, I'm just using Copilot generally. I'm just going to ask it to sort of run through and pick out and analyze where anything to do with interest rates appears in this particular exam. So that's going to give me a sense of what students will need to know, rather than me just teaching interest rates, you know, regardless of what I think it should be taught as. I need to know what the exam board are going to be looking for. And it's given me some really great, it's given me some specifics about where interest rates are part of the question and answer, as well as some of the questions and what their focus is on. This is really important for me, because then I'm thinking, right, okay, so they need to understand the importance of interest rates in economics. But what we can see here is there's quite an interesting thing. It's, you know, interest rates do multiple different tasks within the economy. So what I want my students to do is to get really stuck into this. So I'm going to ask it to generate a challenging question, a question which might have 4 very, very good answers that they're going to have to select between. So I'm not going to give them a classic multiple choice question where 2 are obviously wrong and the other 2 are relatively good. I'm going to give them 4 very distinctly good answers and get them to really discuss and debate which of those are the most accurate. So I'm going to ask it to do that for me, because it's going to have a better understanding than I have. And I'm going to ask it to test my students. I need to test my students. And I want to start by checking their prior knowledge with a multiple choice question. 4 potentially correct answers that will create effective debate. So again, so I'm thinking about, rather than having an agent for this, I'm thinking about my own agency as someone who is invested in pedagogy, and thinking about how I know that to challenge students, I need to give them something to wrestle with, something to get them thinking. Memory is the residue of thought, as Daniel Willingham said. And here it's great. It's given me 4 different answers and a particular debate point for each of those answers for me. And this is really powerful, because that immediately gives me something to get my students started, to get them activated within a lesson. And again, if I want to sort of challenge my students, I know that it's often quite important to get them into a discussion in a real life scenario. And what I love about Copilot is that it can often generate these sorts of creative outputs about a sample company or a random set of factors that can save me a huge amount of time. So for instance, I'm going to ask Copilot here to, I'll just make sure I've got the bit copied. I'm just going to ask it in my prompt here to come up with a scenario, authentic scenario, involving interest rates that will require students to analyze and decide which of 3 major decisions to take. Okay, so here we go. It's going to come up with a company for me. I'm the chief financial officer of a mid-sized manufacturing company, Tech Gear. And it's going to give me a whole set of situations. It's got a scenario, it's got their current situation. It's also got 3 decisions that the board need to consider to go forward on the back of this financial information. So it's already generated something that would have taken me hours to come up with on my own, an authentic scenario for students to test their understanding of what interest rates can do and the sorts of decisions we need to make as a company on the back of whether they are good or not. So once I've done that, I'm then thinking, right, well, how might I present this scenario to my students? So it's all very well, I can just whack it in front of them, but can I think about the ways in which I might introduce this to them so that they all understand it? And then it's going to give me a presentation plan. So this is how I might present it. I might stage it in particular order. I might give them an overview to contend with. Then I might give them the details and the materials. So it's giving me everything that I need to know to structure this information for them. And what I'm going to do now is, knowing that this is now creating a really great spine for my lesson, is I want to make sure, because I'm interested in universal design for learning, and I know that universal design for learning is about giving learners agency, and I'm giving them an inquiry, a project-based piece of learning, I need them to be able to engage with this in the right way. I need them to be able to crack it open and be able to get stuck in. If I put them into groups at this stage, they might be looking at it, they might not be sure of how they can open it and access it. So what I can really do is scaffold this for them, or to give them a choice of scaffolds to make. So I'm going to ask it to, and I always like to praise Copilot. I do believe in being polite to my AI. I don't know why, it's just a me thing. But asking it, what sort of thinking frameworks could my students use as a result? And it's now going to come up with some frameworks that the students could use to help them to unpick this particular scenario. So it's got the classics here: SWOT analysis, PESTLE analysis, cost-benefit analysis, scenario planning. So these are standard business studies tools, economics tools that I can use to unpack this scenario and help the students to get into the task. But where the time saving really gets in for me, because this is all wonderful and it could make a really wonderful lesson, a lesson plan, is I now needed to start to generate the materials that I'm going to need to do this lesson. And again, I wanted to save me time, because I've created something wonderful, but these sorts of wonderful lessons take a lot of time to resource. So fortunately, Copilot's a rescue here. I'm going to ask it to create an individual Word document worksheet for each of the thinking frameworks, leaving a box underneath each bullet point for students to leave an answer, and include the information about the scenario at the top of each worksheet. So I can then divide the groups up into like a carousel. I can give them each an individual thinking framework, but the same scenario to unpack it and unlock it to see what sort of results that we get from it. So let's see if Copilot will do this for me. I've asked it to create not one Word document, but 6 separate Word documents using a specific prompt that I've given it. And you can see there it's now executing that task, comes up in bold to show me that it is actually outputting something for me. And what I'm going to ask me to do now is, so it's going to say it's created the Word document worksheets for each of the thinking frameworks. And what you should hopefully see in a moment is that that will then populate as an individual set of links. So if I click on my PESTLE analysis worksheet up here and open it, in my Word document here, you can see that it's given me the scenario, and then it's done exactly as I asked. It's given me the PESTLE analysis, and it's given me a space underneath for the students to use to put their answers in. So it has actually managed to create for me 6 individual Word documents as worksheets. So through my agency as a teacher, and through thinking about how I can prompt successfully, I can then begin to get Copilot to start to generate all of the necessary materials for this lovely creative lesson here. And you can really go to town with this. I could, for instance, ask it to give me a starter activity based on the Bank of England's interest rates. And I could give them this graph, and then I could say, right, create a set of questions for this graph based on Solar Taxonomy framework. That gives me a nice structure from surface to deep to transfer levels of learning. So all of these questions help all of the students in my classroom access it at the level that they're at. As long as I'm invoking those pedagogical frameworks that I want to use, Copilot will do a great job for me. And one thing I could even do here with this graph is to strip all of the information off the axes and all of the title information and just present a graph with just the plotted line on it and say, this represents the interest rate decisions of a country over a period of a decade. Can you work out why those decisions may have been made at those points? So I could actually remove information from the graph, make it less context specific in order to get students to be applying their knowledge of interest rates onto that. So just a few things that I've found which I find to be incredibly time efficient when I'm creating resources using Copilot. Again, these don't require agents. This is my agency, if you like, bringing my knowledge to bear as a teacher into the picture for this particular part. And I'll just come back to a slide deck here, and just to say that, you know, context for me is everything when you're doing challenge. Knowing the starting points of the learners, knowing how to flex and stretch the learning, particularly important. But what we can see here is how Copilot can support any sort of adaptive planning that you're trying to do. Dave's shown how you can do it using the students' preferences and making sure that we're recruiting their interest and their enthusiasm through relevance and value and authenticity. And what you can see from me is that I'm using pedagogical frameworks to adapt the learning for different requirements and different ways of learning and thinking.